Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Michael Canty. Excited to see everybody starting to pop into the room here. Excited to kick things off in just another minute with the wonderful panel we got today. But we'll let you guys trickle in and we'll kick things off here in just a moment. I like to keep everything on time, so as soon as I hit 2 o'clock on the dot, we're diving right in. I wish I had like a little countdown screen just to get ready. Awesome. All right, it's 2 o'clock, everybody. Really excited to jump in here today. So I have a great panel, and we're going to introduce them in just a few moments here. But before we kick things off, I'm really excited to jump into what the agenda looks like for today. So we're going to have a great panel here talking about some of the top sales execution challenges in B2B from a revenue operations perspective. As we're kicking off the new year, these things are always top of mind, and if you work in RevOps or you work in sales, you know they're almost always a problem, but they're fun to address. So for today, everyone, our agenda is going to be follow this, and it's going to be a really loose format. We want to keep it conversational, and we encourage you guys in the chat down at the bottom. If you have questions, please throw them in there for us. We will get to them as we go and make sure that we find time to answer everything or as much as it comes up as we possibly can. So as the conversation goes today, guys, we're going to talk about some of the inefficiencies in adopting a data-driven sales execution motion. Everybody talks about doing it. Everybody theoretically knows how to put it into practice, but actually getting into the execution can be really, really difficult. And as a part of that, we want to talk about how AI can help and in what different ways. So we're going to go through some different inefficiencies, and we're going to talk about some individual points of this process. But ultimately, before we do that, let's get an introduction to our panelists. So my name is Michael Canty. I'm the head of revenue operations at Contract Book. I'll be sort of moderating today, trying to keep the conversation going, hopefully keeping it a little bit entertaining for you guys. But with me, I have Anton Antish and Carter Perez, but I'll let you two introduce yourselves and give your background. Really excited to have you guys with us today.
Go for it, Anton.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's really exciting to be here. And my background is I've been running sales and companies' processes in general for over 20 years. I studied at Microsoft and VMware, so it was all IT companies. Then I had a very exciting run with a company called Veeam Software. You might have heard about them. We grew from pretty much 0 to 1 billion in sales in 10 years. So it was sort of an amazing story where we faced all kinds of challenges, as you can imagine. And I ran sales there for the Americas region, for the emerging market region, and also was running operations and backend systems teams. So the topic that we're discussing today is very close to my heart. And upon exiting Veeam, when it became too big to my taste, I started working with startups much closer. So I also lately, for the last 3 years, I mostly have experience with smaller teams, trying to apply those learnings and trying to help them avoid the mistakes the big companies make as they build up their operations. And I think the topic today is very relevant to that.
Awesome.
Amazing. And Carter Perez, happy to be here. And thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Revenue Grid and have had the opportunity to live and work in Silicon Valley for over 20 years. I'm a self-professed scaling junkie. Love the challenge of trying to figure out how to get a company to grow and grow rapidly. And data and revenue operations sit central to the scaling process. So excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
This is going to be a lot of fun. So before we go any further, highly recommend after this. I'm sure that the Revenue Grid marketing team will do a great job of getting you guys out this content. But there was a ebook that was written on some of the topics that we're going to cover here today. Highly recommend at the end of this, you go seek it out. If they don't, send it to you first and check it out. There's a ton of great insights in there, and we're going to be covering some of the topics from it today. So let's jump in and kick things off with a question. Feel free to drop your answers into the chat, again, over on the right-hand side. But what we're really interested in is, what are some of your top challenges with sales execution or using data? We sort of have five answers here. If you're other, tell us why. But which of these sticks out as sort of the most impactful or the most limiting in terms of your ability to execute with data? I see C coming in as first. Silo data. That's a fun one. We'll break into silo data a little bit later into the conversation. Acting on insights, I'm seeing quite a bit of. A lot of C's and a lot of D's. C's and D's might get you a degree in college, but it's not going to get you a master's in data and making decisions on it. E, all of the above, Carter Perez. Yeah, that's a fair one too. I actually tend to agree with the all the above. It tends to be a pretty comprehensive problem that needs to be solved. So we'll let a couple more answers trickle in here, but yeah, all the above, Barbara. That's I think that one's going to win the day, even if we see mostly C's and D's. Well, let's jump right into it. So I think, to kind of go along with some of these answers, and Carter and Anton, certainly interested in diving deeper into this with you, but every company wants to be data driven. It's a given. And almost every single one of them experiences a challenge. Like I know I have, and I know you have as well. And I think one of those big challenges to me, right, is, let's jump right down to this first, inefficiency. One of those big challenges to me is, manual data collection analysis is extremely difficult to do. So how have you guys in your experience working in these different organizations helped to remove that complexity around data analysis?
I think the first piece is getting all the, figuring out your data strategy. So getting all the data into one place so that you can start to really analyze it holistically to understand, what's in there and any trends that you've got going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also say, and this will probably be sort of a topic of what I will be talking today quite a bit, is that I think everybody's talked about silos as well. I think that's sort of the root of all evil in any sort of medium-sized and big organization, but even the small one, because once you have like marketing and you have sales here and you have your customer success here, and they all have their own kingdoms, it gets very difficult to get them to work together and play nicely. So I think it's very critical to have somebody in your team high enough so that they have power to actually look at the process, at the end-to-end revenue generation process. Like what happens from the leads through the sales cycle up to the money we're getting in the bank and then expansion, but end-to-end, because nobody's really looking at it end-to-end normally. And that's sort of a big problem. So it needs to be addressed.
So when it comes to like understanding that end-to-end process, uniting teams is always a challenge. So how do you define, like, how is like tactically do you go about like understanding how data is collected and then ultimately working cross team to find better ways to do that and find ways to do it in a way that all teams understand and are working towards the same goal?
I mean, for me, it always starts with the problem, right? And so what are we trying to solve? What are we trying to do in the business? Is it, improve retention or reduce churn? Is it improve our close rate, reduce our sales cycle? So once we start to kind of understand what problem we're trying to solve, then we can figure out, okay, where is the data? What data do I have? What data would I want if I could wave a magic wand, and then start to figure out a path to get it together and then start to push it around and do some analytics on it.
Yeah, actually, I was reading through the deck before when we were preparing for the webinar, and this one was a bit surprising to me because this was definitely an issue 10 years ago when we were sort of in the middle of growing Vim. But now, I mean, there are tools for anything. So you can get a pretty good IT landscape that allows you to avoid this problem. Of course, first you need to design exactly what we were just talking about. You need to understand what the problem is that you want to solve. And once you design the business process, you can implement it in tools rather easily, I would say. The question is, whether we do it or not.
So what is a good catalyst to get people to define that data collection process early on? I think, we were talking about before this call how oftentimes that conversation about how do we collect data and how do we use data often happens too late. And so how do you early on, when these teams are just coming into fruition, spark that conversation and get people understanding why it's important?
I mean, I think I think the example you gave when we were talking earlier, Mike, was perfect, right? Which is if it's an early enough stage company, you can set the data strategy right up front, and that obviously is a perfect world, right? That's you're not having to go back and retroactively, glue and paste stuff together and do the data normalization and all that. But I think, I tell you, it goes right back to that problem, right? Which is if we're, so for example, if we're trying to reduce churn, then, getting the customer success team to, understand their data, what they have and how it can be used to potentially reduce churn becomes a pretty compelling discussion. And, my experience is I very rarely have problems getting people to participate in the discussion. Finding the data and getting it to work for us is an entirely another challenge.
Right. So I think that's a good segue, right? And like the collection piece of this is always a challenge, and especially when it's manual. So this is a great quote. This is a great quote from the VP of RevOps at Pavilion. I'll spare you guys me reading it and reciting it to you. We're going to send you the deck afterwards, so you'll have it for reference. But I think, if it requires a lot of manual labor, nobody wants to do it. And I get it. If you've been in a sales role, you get it. No one wants to manually log information, manually update information. So the question then becomes, how can we use artificial intelligence and the technology at our hands to facilitate that process and ultimately make it a better experience for our users and make the data more actionable for driving insights?
Anton, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think it's still developing quite actively. And again, once I left Veeam, I started investing, and actually now I'm also a partner at one of the venture funds, and we focus on AI quite a bit. So we monitor the landscape and monitor what's happening, and there is definitely potential. There are some really nice tools that give you additional insights that actually help you grow sales, and I think that was probably the biggest sort of advance in the AI area for the sales organizations, because the biggest problem of any sales organization is obviously growing sales and overachieving the quotas. So the tools that help you work with signals, that help you target your messages, your salespeople, your efforts towards people who are having the problem that you're actually helping to solve, I think that was sort of the biggest advancement there. In this area. But then I would say I don't think there is a very clear leader, and obviously not in the data collection and analysis side. That is still sort of developing. A lot of people are trying to solve this problem, but we'll probably discuss it down the line. And I think everybody who has worked with data knows it, is that any data analyst spends only 20% of their time actually analyzing the data and coming up with insights, but 80% of the time preparing the data, working with all the different sources, combining them. So AI has done some progress in that area, but I think not enough. So I would say it's pretty good in terms of helping you targeting your efforts in the area that helps you close deals better. But the progress in terms of how we are collecting this data has been limited. But obviously there are some tools that help us do that, especially our hosts today as well is a good example.
Yeah, and I think you can also use the AI to help you kind of define the patterns inside of your data. So as an example, one of the things that we noticed was if we got to 5 meetings or more, our close rate went up dramatically. And so one of the signals or actionable insights that we we were able to derive out of our data set was, hey, show me all of the opportunities or deals that we're working on that have either 3 or 4 meetings, right?
Yep.
And now I can go coach my reps or coach my managers to say, let's get out there and, hey, this group of accounts or this group of opportunities has 4 meetings. Let's go get a 5th meeting because statistically, we're going to win a lot more of those because we push that extra step.
I think, Arthur, that's a great point, and a great distinguisher for the AI solutions and for Revenue Grid specifically is that it's self-learning. And I think down the line somewhere we have the issue of the static playbooks. So having something that analyzes not just the past data and past experience, but constantly, pretty much in real time, coming up with insights, what matters and what doesn't matter in your sales cycle and what you do as a salesperson or a marketing person, I think that's very important.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, right? And like the example you gave there, we are looking to start doing some similar things on my end as well. Things like looking at the stage tendency of how well we close deals, depending on how long they're staying in stages, and using that to drive action. But I think one of the biggest questions I always get is, how do we know we can trust it, right? So how do you facilitate and breed trust in the information, like the AI and the information that's being collected and how it's being presented? I think, to me, that's always a hurdle that I see like getting over and helping people understand why they can trust
it. I think for me, it's always been about 2 things. One is trust goes up as soon as a rep wins a deal because of some insight or, like that revelation of, hey, I've had 4 meetings with this prospect. If I meet with them a 5th time, I'm, 50% more likely to win the deal. And that's an insight or a learning that more than likely wouldn't have been possible without the use of AI and those learnings. So I think the reps naturally gravitate towards it. Anytime it can help them win a deal or save a deal, or help them unlock a characteristic of a deal, like I'm single-threaded, or, hey, you've pushed this deal 5 times, you're now statistically not going to win this deal, so don't keep investing in it. So it's those insights that help me, whether it's as a revenue leader or as a rep, be more productive and make better decisions about how I'm spending my time and what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah, I think this is another really good one because, and this also has to do with this self-learning and dynamic nature of this type of tools, is that if you set up some sort of KPI system, people will game it. I mean, it's just a tendency. It doesn't mean people are bad, but you can tell your salespeople, okay, send 5 emails or do this amount of calls, and they will do it, or they will trick the system a little bit. But it does not necessarily mean that them hitting these KPIs actually leads to closing your deals better. If you follow the signals that actually track your actual activities, right, and they see what's being closed, what's not being closed, then this trust comes up, because it's not some artificial KPIs. It's just, the reality that's being constantly adjusted. So I think that's another very interesting.
It's balancing the science and the numbers with the art of the sale in a lot of ways, and it's a good gut check. So let's I got plenty more questions here, but let's keep things moving on as we make our way towards sort of the next point of conversation. So listen, like there's a lot of investment going around in regard to AI analytics tools and technologies. Like there's no question about it. It's why like companies like Revenue Grid are here. It's why we're going out and we're seeking more platforms that are able to do this. But even in that, and even with having this powerful analysis capability that's out there from lots of different providers, figuring out which data points matter is tough. It's often a cross-departmental like conversation. It causes it can cause alignment issues. So I think the question I have for you guys here is, when you're working with your different departments and different stakeholders internally, how do you guys define what is the most meaningful data to ultimately analyze so that you can be more efficient with that analysis?
Anton, you want to take that one?
Yeah, This is sort of my pain point. And again, full disclosure, I'm currently CEO at Intento. I run sales and marketing as well. I have a sales team, I have a marketing team, but we use HubSpot. So when I discovered Revenue Grid, I really liked, all the signals and data that can be seen there, but I cannot use it because it's HubSpot. If we use Salesforce, I could have, but I really want to. Because my problem is, as any hands-on sales leader, and we're a relatively small team right now, I have like probably 5-6 salespeople right now. We do pipeline reviews, and it's all about forecasting pipeline reviews, making sure deals are moving through the stages and are being closed. But probably anybody who has done it at any company knows that many times pipeline reviews, they feel artificial. It's like you ask a salesperson, so how are things here? And he is telling you a story, or she is telling you a story. Things are like this and like that. But I'm a data junkie. I'm a physics major. I want to look at numbers. I want to see something, objective that tells me, okay, what is the risk? Is this deal going to close, or we need to focus on some area and talk to a specific person to try to convince them? So having that sort of substance that does not necessarily, provide an oversight, but rather a help to you to make objective decisions, along with the stories and the context that salesperson has in their heads, I think it's just incredibly important. So to me, it's like the main value that just jumps out at me right away. I want my pipeline reviews to be meaningful, not just nice conversations over a cup of tea. So.
And look, I think you can also approach it from the scientific angle, right? Which is, if you get all your data into a data lake or a database of record, then you could start to do, and you normalize it, then you can start to do some correlation analysis that says, let's look at all the closed won opportunities over, for example, the last 18 months, and show me all of the activities or other things that happened that could have influenced the closure of that, that opportunity. And then across that entire population, we're going to get, a handful of data points that are going to correlate to closing accounts, and therefore, they can become a signal, right? So the five meetings versus, more or less is a perfect example where, we wouldn't have necessarily had that insight unless we'd gone in and correlated that to closing accounts.
Yeah, and I think the thing that strikes me about this, right, and again, is like we talk about like platforms that are able to use artificial intelligence to reduce some of the burden on this. It's like, good luck doing that in an Excel spreadsheet, right? Good luck exporting your deals, your activities, your meetings, the ones that never made it into the CRM, and actually finding a meaningful pattern there. So I think with that as sort of like a segue. How does AI help this? I think like there's a lot of jargon that goes around, like there's a lot of jargon that gets thrown around where it's like, we get it into the data lake, and then we normalize it, and then we have like our ETL and our reverse ETL provider who moves the data around. But I think like at the end of the day, like how can AI help make that process more efficient? How can it make it more like data more accessible, and ultimately make the like insights more readily available, as opposed to just like I think my boss may be on the call, and if he's probably scratching his head going, what's reverse ETL and what's ETL? So how do we remove the complexity for the end user and ultimately make this an easier experience to understand and take action?
Anton, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I can share from my experience. And I mean, it's as I mentioned, I'm involved in the AI space quite a bit, and I sort of get cautious when people use term artificial intelligence, because they tend to use it pretty much everywhere. And also we have like an internal joke that previously, if a company puts AI into their investment deck, they're getting high evaluation, and investors jump on it. And we say, okay, for every company like that, you need to change artificial intelligence into matrix multiplication, because that's basically what the artificial neural network is. It's just multiplying some matrices, and then it becomes not as sexy. It's okay, how does matrix multiplication can help you drive actionable insights? But that's just a joke. In fact, it can help you, and it works quite amazingly. And I think the secret is, and where AI is very good, is in finding patterns. And that was sort of the whole revolution behind AI. And it can find patterns where it is impossible for a human brain to find patterns, because it's just too complex. The connections and the consequences and the reasons for this or that outcome, depending on this or that action, they are non-linear. You cannot say that you sent, this email and this led to closing of the deal. But what the artificial neural networks algorithms are good at, they can take all the complexity, all the signals, and they can find the patterns and match them with your deals that are being closed and with your deals that are not being closed. And this way, they can, again, dynamically provide you with these signals or things to look for that can give you an additional probability of closing the deal faster or closing the deal better. And that's sort of the way it works. But I mean, inside it's pretty much black box and magic, and none of scientists know how they operate.
But I think to your point earlier, I mean, that's, I think, if it works and the black box is great. But if it, if the signals that are being produced are irrelevant or, not accretive in terms of helping you move a deal forward or helping you close a deal, then then it becomes another victim in the tech stack.
Yep. Yes.
Yep. My tech debt increases as tools stop being useful for the sales team. So I think like that to me is like one of the biggest challenges, I think, like especially with these tools that are crunching numbers. And I think like going back even a little ways to the point that we get to where we have this great platform like a revenue grid or other that's handling this for us in an automated fashion. If the inputs are bad, the output is worse, right? I think, and that's always a challenge in organizations. So even when you get to this point where you're actually generating actionable insights and you're starting to find maybe they don't align or they're not driving the right type of value, how do you go back and diagnose as a team, especially again when those departments are cross-functional? Like, how do you go back and diagnose as a team where you may have issues with data so that you can ultimately generate better insights?
Well, yeah, again, from my point of view, it comes back to having a team or a person that looks at the process end to end. And we established that at Veeam with help of Salesforce itself. Salesforce actually has some nice practices there. They have the thing that they call excellence circle. We sort of adjusted it a bit for our needs because they focused on sales primarily. We expanded it to the end-to-end revenue generation. But basically the idea is you gather people from marketing, from sales, from customer success, from sales operations. You put them all together in a room in a certain rhythm of business, once per quarter, once per month, and you look at your processes. Forget the tools, just look at your processes. Like, okay, how do leads get passed to your salespeople? How are they getting qualified or disqualified? Things like that. You map out this process, then you think how you should actually implement it into your underlying systems, and you have your backend system team to do that. And if it's a process, if it's ongoing, if you constantly look for ways where you can improve, it will work for you and it will do wonders if you didn't do it previously. If you don't have this centralized thing, it's all back to silos and this, 7 fields for title, as we discussed on the content.
I think go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike.
I just say, I think, obviously, maybe I'm biased to being a revenue operations practitioner to having that one operational unit that looks at that end-to-end experience. But, I do tend to agree. And I think when it comes to that ultimate diagnosis of, where are the issues, when, Anton, to your point, when you're looking at it holistically and the team is building it in a holistic way where they're working together and understanding that end-to-end process, finding those breakdowns in the chain becomes a lot simpler, right? It's a lot easier to manage. And I think when you have that unified team, that unified operational unit, you're able to identify these issues and remedy them and make those insights ultimately, of greater value to the organization.
Right.
Okay. Well, I'll keep trucking on here as we head into sort of the next topic. Again, guys, we're going to send you out these slides at the end of it. So there's some great info in here, but just to keep the conversation rolling with the last 30 minutes, let's head down to inefficiency number 3. We've already touched on this a few times in a few different ways, but I think it's worth its own topic of conversation. Data is siloed and it's coming from various sources. To your point, like there's marketing, there's sales, there's customer success, there's the product team. Heck, there's even finance in the mix, right? Like there's so many different teams that are generating data for the company. And even having a unified team that's working operationally across like all departments, it still can be a challenge to break down those data silos. So how tell me, because I'm trying to solve this myself to a degree. How do you do it? How do you break down these silos and get teams working together and connecting data sources effectively?
You want to tackle that one, Anton?
Yeah, like I said, to me, that's probably the biggest challenge. And because, it's people nature, it's egos and people, no matter how you try to avoid it, there's still politics and people trying to look out for their own. So getting them together and agreeing on something is difficult. But I think sort of the biggest thing, if you can do it, that should really help is getting your CEO to drive this, right? Like he or she needs to be on board. If there is no CEO support, you can have some success, but people, can just ignore you and then do their own thing. So CEO has to be on board. They need to understand that people need to work together towards one goal. And if that is happening, then I think having this sort of group, this rhythm, and then correctly set up KPIs is very important as well. Because the other thing that I have seen time and time again, I'm sure you have, is that, okay, marketing team has a KPI of generating a certain number of leads. Mm-hmm. They will generate it, no problem. They can just buy some lists, upload it into the system, and that's it. And then there is fight starting happening. Marketing tells salespeople, we are giving you leads, you're not converting them correctly. Sales are telling to marketing, no, you're giving us bad leads, we can't convert them. And how do you deal with that? So you have to align the people. They all need to know that they are working. Yes, they are on a different stage of a process, but they're working towards getting actual dollars into the company. It's all about getting the dollars. So if there is a KPI for a number of leads for marketing, there needs to be a KPI of how well they convert. Yes, they don't have full control over it, but there has to be some balance because, it's all about getting the dollars. And finding this balance, finding this teamwork, I think is very important. But I would also say another sort of somewhat surprising, maybe now it's not so surprising, it's common knowledge, but for us it was surprising when we found it out. No matter how well you're aligned on the top level, no matter how well your KPIs are structured, if your individual contributors don't talk to each other regularly, like over coffee or whatever, it also doesn't really work. And we found at Vim, it was a global company always, we had offices all over the world. So the teams where marketing and salespeople had at least weekly get together and they were like friends and they talked informally about, okay, what worked, what didn't work. They performed much better than the ones where it was just KPIs and stuff. So.
And I think, it's funny. I said something to somebody the other day that I think is very akin to this, which is that operational unit, that RevOps team, or whatever you ultimately call it within your organization. They make sure that the strategy from the boardroom is executable in the war room, right? So do you see, like, aside from like those informal gatherings and stuff, do you see that operational unit as helping to define the KPIs and ensuring that there's alignment? Like, what part does that unit play in making sure that the data and the KPI, or the KPIs and the data that ultimately drives, the measurement of those KPIs are aligned?
Yeah, I think to build on what Anton was saying, I think, you got to figure out the win, right? So using his marketing example, is there, okay, fine, we agree on the KPIs, so what? Are we doing anything on, a weekly basis? So I used to have what I call a 3 amigos meeting, and it was CRO, head of RevOps, and CMO, and we would meet for an hour every week, and we would go through, these are the leads that came in, how they convert, what do we learn about them, and we use that as a continuous feedback loop to continuously improve, right? Because I was able to tell the CMO, hey, these leads converted really well, high value opportunities. We're over a period of time, we're closing, a high percentage of those. Let's continue investing in that program. Hey, you did this SEO buy over here, or this PPC buy over here. Those aren't converting at all, and they're a waste of our time. So let's not do that.
Yep. And I think like right there, there's a really good point. There's a really good point to be had too, which is like data doesn't necessarily connect the teams. You could have the best like insights and analytics in the world, right? But that human element of actually taking a look at the information together and ultimately collaborating on what you're seeing is really, I think, the most critical thing here. And I think we all imagine that once we have the dashboard, the decisions make themselves. But really, there is that human feedback loop that's an essential piece of this.
Yeah.
100% agree.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's keep on pushing forward here. We have, again, some great quotes, some great data and statistics. But let's sort of talk through this last inefficiency, because I think we have about 15 minutes left here, and I want to make sure or 25 minutes left. And I want to make sure we leave about 10 minutes or so at the end for the audience. So this is, I think, probably the one that everybody feels the most. I think the data being siloed, some of us feel more than others, but ultimately implementing insights in a way that's actionable for the team is a really, really tough thing to do. Even when we have the right information together, it's tough to surface the most important things immediately. So how do you do this for your teams in an effective way? And how do you enable it so that they can take the right actions?
And I think Anton alluded to this earlier, where this is where I think AI can really come in and help us, because it detects those patterns that are just too complex that we won't identify or see in the selling process. And so based on that, we can then create signals that would help us prompt either a manager or a rep or a CS person that there's some action required to improve our odds of winning or improve our odds of retention or whatever. And so that, because it continuously learns and adjusts, you can set up these signals essentially to push those out to the team to help them. Almost think of it as a digitally live guided selling, right? It's real time, it's helping, it's taking the insights of all the past deals that we've won and lost, and helping coach the reps or other folks to take actions that will improve our likelihood of winning.
Yeah, I think it's also a very interesting one, because Carter described a situation that's very spot on, because I don't think it's difficult to implement the insights in a way that it's actionable. I think people don't find the insights. They just look at data. They look at dashboards. It's very easy to put a bunch of dashboards together that show you a bunch of different things, but the question is, so what? If you cannot ask the question, so what, to each dashboard that you have, throw away this dashboard. It's just because otherwise you will have an illusion that you are data-driven, but you are not data-driven. You're just looking at pretty pictures and nothing is happening. But get into these insights. Okay, what is really my data telling me? What should I do to improve? Is very difficult, because you need to find very strong data analyst team. And the challenge there, and I have felt it firsthand, like very much so, is that there are great mathematicians and data analytics who know how to build all kinds of complex models, but they don't understand your business. They can't, and you cannot really explain it to them, because it's just it's a gap of understanding, and it's very difficult to cross it. So yeah, there are people who understand both the business part and the data science part, but they are pretty much the weight of gold, right? So it's difficult to find them. So these AI-driven tools, in a sense, they help you, have these gold-weighted people in your organization without having these people, and that's a very important thing.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. I think we were joking around yesterday, right, and saying that like finding that person with both the ability to analyze the data and understand the go-to-market motion and the core metrics and what they mean is very, very difficult to do, and these platforms can help to bridge that gap in a lot of ways. So, yep. See there, Deidre. We see it all the time too, and I don't think you're alone in seeing the same thing. And so my next question, right, is even when you have those actionable insights, right? There's different context that's needed for every level of the organization, right? What the rep needs to see versus what the head of sales needs to see or the CMO needs to see are two different things. So how does AI and these new like emerging platforms who are helping to surface these insights, how do they do that in a meaningful way, or what do you see as most meaningful at those different levels?
Carter, I think you are the best.
Yeah, person. I think for me, it's the appropriate insight at the right time for the right level, right? So, for example, AI applied against forecasting is really interesting because it gives me far greater kind of depth or perspective on a rep and what they're likely to write or close in a given time period, given all of the dynamics of the deal, how many times it pushed, what the contact frequency has been like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? There's a ton of data points in there, and you can use those to improve your forecasting accuracy. Well, the rep doesn't really care about that, right? All the rep wants to know is, what do I got to do to close this deal so I can put the commission check in my bank account? Yeah. And so it's thinking about the different levels of insights or the different levels of perspective that you've got, and making sure that the signals or the AI notifications are relevant to the audience you're presenting them to.
Yeah, I think that is I think one thing here is like, how do you prevent information overload? And I think that's a big piece of it. It's great to know at an individual level, like some of the core metrics of like how much pipeline does someone need to succeed, like how much do they need to do in terms of activity, in terms of generation, to ultimately hit their attainment and goals. But I think again, like it can overload people with too much information. So how do we stop that from happening, right? I think again, like servicing the right insights at the right time is the right piece of it. But is there a chance that AI can often overload or has the potential to overload people with too much information and make it even almost like analysis paralysis and difficult to take action?
100%. I think that's where, as whether we're sales leaders, rev ops leaders, or business leaders, that's where I think we have to be the voice of ration here, right? And just say, look, these are whatever those insights are, if they line up to our, annual priorities or quarterly priorities or whatever, but we also have to be brave enough to say, okay, look, yes, I realize I've got these 37 other data points or insights over here, but it's just going to cloud the picture and confuse people. And so, I think there's a lot of work out that would show that, people can pay attention to kind of 3 to 5 things, maybe upwards of 10. But once you get pretty much over that, the average person, a lot of it is just going to go, into the digital recycling bin. Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. So I have one last question, I think, before, sort of turn it over to Q&A to the audience and seeing what questions you have there. The last thing to me, and I think it's sort of, at least in my opinion, the most important question to answer here is, like, what is the real cost to the business of not investing in a good sound data strategy and analytics early on? What does that mean for the business, like, long term, if you fail to do that in an effective way?
I think for me, it's just longer term pain, right? I mean, I think I think the question you were asking earlier about, gosh, if I'm starting a company, I could create a data strategy from day one, and that prevents me from then, having to transform and normalize all my data at some point in the future. So it's just taking away the future pain as you scale, because you did it right the first time.
Yeah. I mean, I think anybody who has worked in a big enough company, they know how painful it is, because pretty much every big company is screwed in that way. So they know that it's better to avoid it and then save some pain in the future by designing it as early as possible. If you haven't worked at a big company, then please be very, very scared and design your data strategy from the get-go and address these things, because as you grow and as people add things uncontrollably, it will be very difficult to find where the truth really sits. So
yeah, and I think, to your point, once you get to a certain size and you need to start making decisions quickly, and you need to start making the right decisions quickly, right? It's not just about making a decision, and it seems like it goes without saying, right? But it's about making the correct decision, or as correct a decision as possible. If you're in crunch time and it's, leading into that next round of funding, or you're preparing for the big round and you're scrambling to get your data in order so that you can make more effective decisions and drive better revenue. And it's not the firefight you want to have at that time, right? And the more you can invest in it early, the more streamlined things will be when the time comes to really hit the gas and take it to the next level.
Totally.
Yep. Agreed.
So I think that sort of takes us to close to the end here. But I think, let's sort of kind of cap it off with, before we turn it over to the audience, with, like, what does the future hold? I think, listen, I'm going to turn it over to you two, because I think you two know better than me. But as it comes to being data driven, what does the future hold, and what do we all need to be, like, walking out of here being aware of as we head back to our respective organizations?
I mean, for me, I feel like if it's not already, it's quickly becoming table stakes, which is, if you don't have it, your likelihood to succeed either becomes that much more difficult or impossible. So I think it is quickly becoming a business standard. Anton, how do you think about this?
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of it becoming a table stakes. However, I would say there are some downsides, which is it's not that easy to understand data correctly. It's almost an education in itself. And basically, if you think that you can, just work with Excel a little bit and then be able to make the right decisions on relatively complex data, and any modern organization has lots of complex data, that might be a bit of a self-deception. So definitely these AI-based tools, they help, they take away this problem. But I just want to make an emphasis that if you make an additional effort of educating your people on what it actually means to, to analyze data, to read the data, to be data-driven, that will give you that competitive edge as well. Because everybody talks about it, not everybody actually understands what understanding the data means.
Awesome. Well, awesome. Thank you guys for answering all the questions I had, and hopefully answering some of the questions the audience has had. But if there's any lingering questions, everybody who's still here, would love to have you throw some of those questions into the chat, and we can field them off to our two experts here and hopefully answer some of what's lingering for you. And if not, I'll just sort of sit here and nod my head, and we'll sort of wait. But I think, I do think it is really interesting, like how I remember even, less than 10 years ago, like the amount of progress that's been made in terms of like your smaller organizations being able to harness and leverage their data has been like monumental. And again, it's companies like Revenue Grid that are out there helping people to consolidate that information and make it meaningful to the organization. I haven't seen any questions come in yet. Anybody out there? Come on. I know there's a couple out there, everybody. Oh, I just saw one pop in. So let's see what we got here. This is from Deidre. So thank you very much. Does the AI help to identify which data elements are significant? If so, how?
Absolutely can. So it can, as the example I was using earlier is if we're looking at, what are the attributes that lead to closing a deal, right? I mean, we can look across, 5,000 deals and understand, from the number of emails that were sent, number of emails received, number of calls that were done, number of meetings, demos, who attended, what was the relationship map. All of those types of things are things that can be uncovered through your data. And, the AI can then take a look at that and say, okay, of all of these, let's say we've got, 200 types of activities, events, emails, all of, meetings, collateral pieces, et cetera. It can look at all 200 of those and say, okay, which ones are correlated to accounts that end up closed won, and which things are correlated to accounts that were either no decision or closed lost or things like that. And from that, we can then develop a signal or an insight that will help us advance it. And I think, the caution I would say is it is immensely helpful, but it's not a silver bullet. You still have to apply human intelligence across the top of it to rationalize it and make sure that you're using it efficiently inside your organization. I think it goes back to that, as revenue ops leaders or go-to-market leaders, we have to bring some intelligence to the party to say, yeah, I've got 200 data elements, but if I expose all of those to my sales team, they're going to drown in data. And obviously that's not productive. So these are the 5, 10, whatever that are really important, and we're going to use those.
I agree. Awesome. Great question. Do we have any other questions from the audience here before we look to wrap things up? I know there's one more out there, guys. Come on. Someone's got one more question for us. Don't be shy. I won't read your name if you don't want me to. Okay. Well, we'll give it another second here. So I think just to sort of wrap things off, this is honestly one of my favorite steps in the whole, one of my favorite slides in the whole deck, but the 4 steps to adopting the data-driven strategy. This is, I think, again, easy to put on a slide, but hard to execute. So, for you two, which of these is the most important? And they're all important as we drive towards that strategy, but which of these is the most important step and the most difficult to execute that people should be aware of?
I think for me, it's always about developing that actionable plan to improve things, right? I mean, once you've got a good data strategy, a lot of that, there's less that has to go around about getting the data, cleaning the data, and all of those things. And it really becomes much more usable. But then it's thinking through, once we identify the area or the issue, really thinking through, okay, what process change do we need to make? Making sure that we're vetting that cross-functionally. So just because I change something in sales, I may totally screw up customer success. So I've got to be aware of, upstream and downstream, how that impacts other organizations.
And we actually did just get another question here, and I want to make sure we answer it before we tie things off. So sometimes there are surprise data elements, such as new competitors or decision-making levels that are not as obvious. Can AI help to ID those and surface those as more relevant than other insights or more relevant than other data points?
Absolutely. So, and I'll use a example where, so, you can do a lot inside of LinkedIn as an example and pull, they've got a pretty robust API and pull a lot of data out of there. So, you can use either a CRM or a, AI layer on top of that to help you determine when, people that are involved in your deals either get, have a title change or leave the company or things like that. So, there's external data sources out there that you can map into your, into your org or into your CRM or your AI layer that will give you, hey, so-and-so who's involved in this opportunity went to G2 Crowd and was looking at competitors. That would be something that in a normal world, I would never have.
Awesome. Well, thank you both very much. We're almost at time, but this was a great conversation. Everybody out there watching, I hope you found it valuable. Again, we're going to send out the deck, or the wonderful marketing team at Revenue Grid is going to send out the deck as well as some other marketing material afterwards. But thank you all for joining here today. Thank you to both of my two guests here for joining, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye.